Okay, I think we'll get started here. Hello, everybody. My name is Jackie. I'll be your chair for this session. Welcome to our paper session on work, something that we all do. Today, joining you guys will be 4 speakers. First up would be Lopez. Without further ado, Mr. Lopez, please take us away.
First of all, let me just try to share screen. Okay, well, first, thanks very much for the opportunity to present my study. I have been researching about life meaning, specifically how professionals maneuver through work, life, and the self to find spaces for life meaning. I graduated from Case Western University last year. The first thing that I would like to do is just to introduce myself. I have been an HR practitioner for the past 20 years. I have been working in human resources in different multinationals for the past 20 years. And there was something in my personal conversations with professionals that struck me, and that was the area that I wanted to research. So I took a break 3 years ago and I got my doctorate from Case Western University, and the study that I'm presenting today is one of my studies. So it is not a surprise that we are living a very peculiar context for the past, I would say, 50 years, perhaps even more, as a consequence of the Industrial Revolution up to the 21st century. We are living times of extremes in environment, politics, and economics. At the same time, we are experiencing unprecedented levels of wealth, which many times leads to materialism. And the technology, the overburden of technology are many times taking us apart from the real self in every one of us. And that is precisely the core of my research. After speaking with many professionals who were very successful, but in the end, very empty human beings. So that raised my attention, and I decided to research what was behind that, and if as a practitioner we could do something, and as an academic we could do something as well. So my research question for my paper, for my research, is how do professionals maneuver along the web of life meaning to create well-being? And my literature review took me through a very interesting two-sided areas. The first one, philosophy or psychology, and the second one, as a practitioner, the HR field. From the psychology or philosophy, my research took me to the evolution of psychology and how psychology has evolved from being the study of the mind, the study of the personality, to the study of consciousness. That has been a very interesting journey. So I went from Plato and the myth of Earth in the Plato's Republic. I moved to Carl Jung, transpersonal psychology and the collective unconsciousness, moving from him to positive psychology, and I ended up more or less with James Hillman and the Econ theory. That is on the more academic side, but from the human resources side, I have been researching how, as practitioners, we have not approached by no means the multidimensionality of the human being. So HR is based precisely in the traditional psychology and the study of the mind and personality. And many times that is the reason why there's that feeling of emptiness. For my research, I have used a second-generation qualitative grounded theory, Strauss and Corbin, and particularly the constructivism in grounding theory to assign meaning to the findings. The data that I gathered was through interviewing 40 HR professionals globally in different countries, in different companies, but globally. And I interviewed people. I stopped at 40 because I reached already saturation. There were no more concepts. There were not new ideas. So with 40 semi-structured interviews is when I fought saturation. So after the interviews that I had, what I would say is that there are two different results that I would like to highlight. The first one, as an HR practitioner and as an academic researcher, people find meaning and well-being when there are three components. The first one is the chances to develop oneself, the construction of oneself. The second one is a meaningful work, and the third one is family or positive social relationships. When you have a triumvirate of those three foundations, is where people find meaning, and meaning leads to well-being. In terms of implications, I would divide two, one as an academic and the second one as an HR practitioner. As an HR practitioner, obviously, the discipline has not done well in approaching the multidimensionality of the human being. As I said, since the Industrial Revolution and up to even today, we have been considering people as resources, not really as human beings, as resources for the production of whatever the output would be. Right now, we could see a little bit a trend considering other spaces for the human being, but certainly in human resources, we cannot be proud to speak about how we have treated people. So that's the first outcome that I would say. We need to design spaces so that people develop fully as a multi-dimensional being. And as an academic, there has been many written in terms of where people find life meaning. This is the first of my studies. Once I conclude with this one, the next one is one that I have already done as well. It's a quantitative where I try to prove what I say in this research. And finally, the next that will come in my research agenda is going to be a mixed methods paper that will have an integration of this qualitative paper and the quantitative paper that I have done. And basically, this is my study. This is my research, and these were the conclusions that I have been doing, interviewing all these people for the past year. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, it's like 10 minutes, right?
Yeah, that was perfect. All right. So our next speaker is Dr. Benjamin Hunnicutt. Yes, Dr. Hunnicutt, please take us away.
Is it visible now, my share screen?
Yep.
Okay, my name is Hunnicutt, Benjamin Hunnicutt. I'm a professor at the University of Iowa. I have been here for 46 years. I've submitted the paper here to the conference theme agenda, number 4, the role is responsibility in personal, institutional, or global well-being. And I'm in the session here for work. I'm not exactly sure why. I'll leave that to better minds than myself. I have only 10 minutes, and so I have practiced this, and I think I can do it in 10 minutes. The title of my paper is Caveat Emptor, Caveat Adspiret Emptor. Let the buyer beware and aspire. Consumers remain vulnerable, subject to capitalism's exploitative pressures to buy products that exacerbate dependencies while discouraging competency, autonomy, and relatedness. Let the buyer beware. The unhealthy effect of consumerism has long been a target for criticism among psychologists. However, they have often avoided direct involvement in the free market, arguably an area that has the greatest need and potential. One of those areas, these new areas, the experience and transformation economies, these are new healthy market opportunities for applying psychological and other types of research. Presently, the experience and transformation economies producing intangible goods are growing at a rapid rate. Some say they have recently been the fastest growing segments of Western economies. The COVID crisis have certainly slowed development, but with the ending of the pandemic, please God, pent-up consumer demand for experiences is becoming an economic driver. What is the experience economy? Just look around, do a Google search covering the last week with the experience economy. You'll be amazed. You may be as surprised as I certainly was. Pine and Gilmore, known by many to be the first to recognize the phenomenon, offer the example of a friend who was traveling in Italy, touring Venice. He stopped for coffee in St. Mark's Square, among the most beautiful places in the world. He took his time, enjoying the place, the people, the street performers. When the check arrived, he noticed that the price for the coffee was several times more than what he was used to paying. He remembered, however, that he did not feel overcharged. The experience was well worth it. Examples are everywhere. Starbucks, Hard Rock Cafe, Chuck E. Cheese, my family's favorite, GameWorks, Build-A-Bear workshops, Airbnb, Comic-Con, the host of amusement parks, following Walt Disney World's model, escape rooms, Pilates, and hot yoga classes, Meow Wolf, that's a big one, Secret Cinema, Best Buy, and other retailers that are improving, and even selling the experience of shopping, of all things. Recently, hoping to add some precision in my last book last year, The Age of Experiences, I offered this definition. In the experience economy, the customer adds value to the experience product. The customer becomes increasingly active. The more active they are, the better the experience, and the more the experience product is part of the experience economy. The customer's leisure and productive activity, work, becomes one and the same. The prosumer, the producer, consumer in one, is born. All of the above are open invitations for psychologists to lend a hand, using their research to promote these healthy trends. The second part, the transformation economy, is even more inviting, offering even more potential for healthy development. The transformation economy is founded on the assumption that most of us would like to improve ourselves. Pine and Gilmore state the hypothesis simply: we want to transform ourselves. This hypothesis finds strong support in the findings of positive psychologists, summed up by Martin Seligman's observations. Human beings are often, perhaps more often, I would say most often, drawn by the future than they are driven by the past. Seligman goes so far as to call our species Homo prospectus, looking forward. Let the buyer aspire, Adspiret, Emptor. Increasingly, we purchase skills, interest, involvement. To borrow Barbara Fredrickson's term, we're buying the means to broaden and build our lives and experiences. Increasingly, we gain competencies, interests, and so forth. We then own the means of production. That's a pregnant phase indeed. Becoming more and more autonomous, one of the three pillars of self-determination theory that you all doubtless will recognize. Examples, my wife and I, that's not our picture of ourselves, but generic folks dancing. We love ballroom dancing. We signed up for classes several years ago. We learned enough to get going, joining community dance clubs that hired bands and rented halls, part of the experience economy. Broadening and building as we go along our repertoire. We now own and invest regularly in the means of production of the experience product we consume, the dancing. Our work, productive activity, and leisure, fun, are one and the same activity. Poker sweat is one of the ways, is a good sign of that merging of producer and consumer. Other examples, just look around. Instructional offerings proliferate: meditation, kung fu, tai chi, instruction, classes at Home Depot, Hobby Lobby, local groceries, musical instruments, and so forth. The music is growing, long and growing. Meaning tourism is an example of, apropos of this conference. And the spiritual entrepreneur Our search for meaning and for groups to engage with us in that search may also be facilitated through the marketplace. For example, it is possible now to sign up for a visit to the Sami in Norway, the indigenous people once called Laplanders, the reindeer people. Promoters call such a visit a spiritual adventure. Their specific aim as spiritual entrepreneurs is to assist customers in their search for meaning. That's part of their literature. Conclusion. The experience economy and the transformation economy have the potential to counter consumer vulnerabilities by offering healthy alternatives that promote genuine well-being. That potential, however, must be articulated, represented, and promoted. Of course, the very real threat of commodification looms. Unhealthy opportunities are perhaps more available these days in the new economies than healthy ones. Again, caveat emptor, let the buyer beware. Still, the experience economy and transformation economy are well worth the risk of involvement, considering that these two new economic stages appear inevitable. The option is to try to guide and improve the experience products on the basis of solid empirical research, or sit and carp on the sidelines. I challenge then professionals in the new science of happiness to become more directly engaged in the marketplace, guarding against hazard and assisting both consumers and producers and consumers by helping businesses and entrepreneurs, as consultants perhaps, design healthy experiences in the experience economy and transformation economy based on the best recent research, helping consumers make healthy choices and find products that deliver what psychologists have discovered about human well-being. In The Age of Experience, my book last year, I detail ways businesses and entrepreneurs may apply psychological and neurobiological research to experience design in order to create experiences and transformation products that promote authentic human flourishing, providing copious examples. I summarize some of the relevant promising findings in Appendix 8, which I'll show in a second, in a table of consiliencies that bring together points of broad agreement about human well-being drawn from the research of a variety of disciplines, psychology, neurobiology, economics. I include as broad headings both positive subjective experience and positive individual trait. I offer the table as a starting point for psychologists and others to become more engaged in the experience economy and the transformation economy. I have no time now to go through this, but this is a list of positive subjective experiences and positive individual trait. Of course, Wong is very much part of this table in his headings, resilience and meaning, of course. Again, I have no time to go through this. If our scientists lend a hand, the future looks promising indeed. In the 1970s, Alvin Toffler, I'm not sure any of you remember him, predicted that soon we shall become the first culture in history to employ high technology to manufacture that most transient yet lasting of products, the human experience. Hopefully that day is arriving with the application of scientific research to the production of human goods in the marketplace. What I have called a eudaimonic technology may be aborning. Imagine a future in which such a technology has revolutionized the production and availability of the intangible goods of life, the same way that technologies have previously revolutionized tangible goods, airplanes and so forth. The future is not guaranteed. Hazards abound. I end by renewing my challenge to embrace the marketplace as a powerful vehicle to deliver research findings. Most of all, I want to share my sense of urgency for the need to assist consumers in the marketplace in their marketplace choices that are still at risk, but now have the potential to build competencies and skills essential for autonomy, resilience, and the search for meaning. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hunnicutt. That was very interesting and definitely a future I personally would like to see. Well, our next speaker will be Shannon Eastman. Shannon, please take us away.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll just get this up on screen. So I am not a doctor. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm probably a spiritual entrepreneur, but I work mostly in the financial services industry, fintechs and corporates. I tend to bridge innovation and technology with large, regulated, enterprise-sized firms. And as part of that, I'm just going to move, there we go. There we go. So I co-create growth with small business owners in two sectors, financial services and personal development, my personal interest. And as part of that, there is a ton of market research that I do. And for the last 5 years, I've developed a community in the financial services space that I can go to regularly. So maybe 3 or 4 dozen of them. And so they're known to me. And in March of 2021, I decided to pick up the phone and talk to a few of them about what their business plans were. COVID was happening. I think all of us wanted to know what everyone else was doing with business and working remotely. Yeah, about 12 months into the pandemic. But what I got was nothing really to do with business and a lot to do with what was going on with them personally. So I took a moment to reflect and I thought, I'm going to change the question and I'm going to ask, instead of like 5 or 6 people, I'm going to ask 30 people, because I was so curious with, one, just how vulnerable and authentic these conversations were. And 2, I wanted to know if it was happening everywhere in the financial services industry or predominantly in Dublin, Ireland, where I'm based. So I talked to senior job titles. I think that's important because these are men in financial services, age 48 to 60, who are really at the top of their game. So it's not like they can say, well, in 3 to 5 years' time, I'm going to get promoted and then everything will be great. These are men who are already there. So they're executives, senior leadership even. And I expanded my research, Ireland, the UK, Australia, and USA. Here is my question. How has COVID changed your view on what is meaningful to you now? It was preempted by a book that came out of the UK a couple months earlier. I think it was in December of 2020, maybe January 2021, called The Rise of the Meaningful Economy. So that definitely influenced. So I got that book immediately and thought, I'm curious if meaning and meaningful is taking form and shape in the financial services space, which has been dubbed by a dear friend of mine who's the ex-regulator of a central bank, saying the financial services industry is the most soulless industry on the planet. Anyway, so the full research I've published publicly, mostly for the financial services professionals. I felt it was really important for them to know that they were not the only one, that it was a common fear. Although going into the research, I certainly wasn't expecting it. But once the research was done, I thought, yeah, that kind of makes sense. So what I've done for this presentation is I've screen grabbed a few of the sound bites that came out of this 1 question, 30 interviews survey, which was done one-to-one over Zoom for about 20 minutes. I did not publish about 10 of the comments. I felt 10 of the comments were a bit hyperbolic without context. I don't know if that was right or not to do, but I decided to keep them out. So if you want the Word document with all of it in there, you can get in touch with me. I'm happy to share it with you. But those hyperbolic statements were more like highly functioning suicidal. And while I know these individuals personally, I know that was not an immediate fear. They were just at a state where they were so frustrated that they did in that moment identify as highly functioning suicidal. So here's another comment, which was, it's been largely about taking time out to reflect on what this means going forward. 6 months now thinking about it, and I've had more sleepless nights than I've had answers. This one on the far left is, I don't mean to laugh, but this is one of the most senior individuals at one of the largest banks in the world. And he had told me that he picked up a book on shamanism because he was wondering if shamans knew the answer to meaning and the meaning of life, which just felt so out of character for this individual. The other one was the meaning of life doesn't need to be answered when you're busy. Sorry, when you're busy doing stuff to make life meaningful. The question arises though, once you've done it all and now realize that's not meaningful. It's scary to ask myself, what have I been doing this whole time to get it all wrong? He's 58, he would be financially independent, and he's having a very difficult time. He was in March 2021. This one was interesting for me as well, that their perception of meaningful, they associate with the Peace Corps, but that's not practical, not for me anyway. I don't know what the answer is. I know that I can't go back to the life I had before the pandemic. The change has been forced on us. The questions have been forced on us. And I don't want these questions waking me up in the mornings. Has anyone figured out an answer? Am I the only one losing sleep to this? And I think this is the last one. The job pays well, and that's important. When there's enough money, the meaningful question doesn't feel as important because money can buy meaningful, if that makes sense. These are direct quotes. I expect, though, that money and what is meaningful now will have changed for a lot of people this past year. It has changed for me. It's like my world today had the curtains pulled back on it, and I'm seeing for the first time that a lot of what I thought made me happy was noisy distractions drowning out this deep sense of dread. Well, dread is louder than the noise these days. So the three things that were very common to all of these conversations that I was having is that each one suggested that they were the only one going through this, that somehow they'd missed some strategy or some tool to help them stay calm during this pandemic, and they were alone in it. And then the other pattern was that they didn't want anyone else to know that they were struggling. And the words confusion, despair, and meaninglessness were common experiences. So I don't necessarily have a structured solution that I can put forward, but I would like to share some of the ideas that I've been pondering as a result of these questions and these conversations. Business development, be it marketing, media, sales, or just bringing new products to market, or even your own R&D, it's directly proportional to personal development. And that made me wonder, when your people are in despair, productivity takes a hit. But what happens when your senior leadership are struggling? But they're masking it. So they're highly functioning and they're not showing it, but there has to be some underlying impact that shows up in the day-to-day. And then my other idea is the time for woo-hoo, the woo-woo purple stuff that they never wanted to talk about. I think it's arrived, because talking about the mind and the effects of stress really matters right now. I'm seeing a lot of organizations take on mindfulness in the workplace. I'm not sure that's going far enough, and I'm not sure it's moved beyond early adopters, not necessarily to the degree that it can be mainstream. But I also think that we need to consider highlighting the distinction between what is self-healing and dealing with unconscious trauma versus self-development, which is what we love to talk about in business because it feels more commercial, which is leadership and influence and your personal brand and your thought leadership. And the questions this has left me with is, the pandemic seems to be easing, at least in my part of the world, in Ireland, UK, some of Europe. So does that mean that this existential inquiry that's opened up in March, April of this year is now going to ease with it? And if it's dismissed, where does that existential inquiry go? And if it persists, then what are we going to do about it? And as someone who works in financial services, crypto, blockchain, artificial intelligence, quantum computing, I'm hearing everywhere and talking to loads of companies who are also suggesting that the next business as usual all change is expected to be Web 3.0. And that's expected to land in 2027. So I expect an enormous change in the workplace as a result of that, as jobs become redundant and as robots and technology take over more and more of what we don't want to do. So what have we learned from this all change COVID-wise that will make us better able to manage what I perceive is coming in, let's say, 2025? The end.
Thank you, Shannon. That was excellent. And our next speaker is Dr. Claude Helene Mayer. Dr. Mayer, please take us away.
Welcome to my talk today. I'm talking about humor as a coping strategy of employees in remote workspaces during COVID-19, because we could see that the world has really changed during the past year and that humor has been used in the workspace. There's a thin line that separates laughter and pain, comedy and tragedy, humor and hurt, and this is what I'm going to talk about in this talk today. Since COVID-19, we have really experienced lots of differences and measures which include actually self-isolation with regard to lockdown scenarios of different kinds, and remote working and new homeschooling situations have really evolved during the past year. We can also see increasing mental health problems and growth in suicide rates all over the world and immense changes in the workplaces. And we wanted to look at coping strategies. When we look at the pandemic challenges in a global context, we are having a positive, mentally well and healthy mindset that is really extremely important, but that cannot always maintained. And we wanted to look at coping strategies and how people can maintain maybe this kind of mindset or build it up within the workplaces. Such a mindset can be created through humor, which impacts positively on resilience, happiness, social support, and also connection. Humor is a coping strategy to deal with difficult situations and has a positive effect on mental health and well-being. It supports individuals in changing their perspectives and in focusing on the problem from another angle whilst distracting themselves. We can see that humor has various positive effects as a coping strategy, which often individuals are not even aware of, especially not in the workplace. And when we are looking at workplaces, it is often not referred to often. Looking at social media, we can say that it has become important during the pandemic and has really increased in importance, not only in educational terms, but also with regard to social connection, how social connections are made and work relationships are built. A major tool of connection in work relationships, and it is an important means to connect with colleagues and with clients in the work context, not only for work-related content, but also for humorous communication. Our research aimed at researching humor in remote workplaces and in the relationships of employees during COVID-19. We've researched it from a qualitative design, a humanetical research paradigm, and we had 22 employees, 15 were female and 7 male. They were all South African citizens of different cultural groups, and exploring the humor used in the professional WhatsApp communication of colleagues working in a consultancy organization in Gauteng. That is one of the provinces in South Africa during a hard lockdown in March and April 2020. We used content analysis to analyze the WhatsApp communication and to see how humor is used. Our findings show that humor was used to cope with really highly challenging situations of working remotely and being locked up at home for over 6 weeks during this hard lockdown situation. And we could find 4 topics that were identified and that 5 themes that were majorly important. Women professionals and work-life challenges, then individual change from being a professional to moving to being a savage, then to new lifestyles, marital relationships during social isolation, and the cure of COVID-19. Looking at the first topic, we could see that much of the humor in the WhatsApp messages really dealt with the struggle of women to find a balance between work and life, dealing with kids and homework, and also with their work in the home situation. One image is very much portrayed of a very old white-haired woman, and it was used very often in this WhatsApp communication. And underneath the picture, you can see a caption, 5 days after homeschooling. So really, that was really very humorous for a lot of the colleagues within the WhatsApp communication. Another image was used, which shows a crying child who screams continuously for pizza while a devastated mother tries to calm down the child, offering different kinds of healthy food without success. And a lot of comments referring to it. With regard to the second topic, we could see that the change of individuals from smart-looking professionals to really ugly-looking individuals were shown within the WhatsApp communication, and people could really laugh about it online. Several images show the development of these individuals going into a state in which they really didn't want to find themselves in. Again, other images showed a comparison of employees in their offices and workplaces in a normal workplace situation, and then again followed by a situation in which they sit and eat, belch and fart. Looking at the communication, we could see that humor also referred to the new lifestyles. For example, one post shows the foot of a chicken with the title, "I think my hand sanitizer was a bit too strong." Other humorous comments showed that, for example, one outstanding post presents the following statement: "A notice from a psychiatric association. Dear citizen, during the quarantine time, it is considered normal to talk to the walls, plants, and pots. Kindly contact us only if they reply." So we could see that the lifestyle changes really were challenging for our colleagues here in this research. As a reaction to these WhatsApp posts, a colleague posted, for example, the following joke: "So, homeschooling going well, 2 students suspended for fighting and 1 teacher fired for drinking on the job." We could see that a lot of WhatsApp communication was about humor that was not related to the actually work they were doing. Then a lot referred to couple relationships and responsibilities during the lockdown. The joke reads, "How long is this social distancing supposed to last? My husband keeps trying to get into the house." Or, "Thoughts and prayers are going out to all the married men who've spent months telling the wife, 'I'll do that when I get time.'" So a lot of the humor within the situation of the workplace was referring to the struggle of couple relationships at home during the lockdown. There was only one joke that referred to COVID-19 cures. However, the topic of the cure and the question how COVID-19 will be cured in the long term was very important for the colleagues communicating with each other. But the only joke that was mentioned was, "If schools are closed for too long, the parents are going to find a vaccine before the scientists." We can see that humor was really, especially in the first weeks of the COVID situation and hard lockdown, very important within the WhatsApp communication. It actually dominated the professional communication within the WhatsApp, and it really helped to cope mentally with different areas of distress within the workplace situation and especially beyond it. We can see that humor deals with the burdens of the social and relationship-oriented side effects in 5 themes: balancing the relationships and responsibilities at home and at work, managing the relationship with oneself under new circumstances, dealing with the new life circumstances and the social contextual changes owing to governmental decisions. We could also see that transforming internal family relationships of being thrown back onto them during a strict lockdown were mentioned with humor, and wishing for self-efficacy to cure the disease and return to a previous lifestyle or routine was often mentioned within the humorous images or comments. With regard to recommendations, we can see that in remote working spaces, humor should become a topic as an important coping resource in theory and practice. It is often not talked about on a meta level of communication, but could be really used by organizations to improve remote working workspaces and the communication within them. We know that it needs further theoretical exploration, looking at face-to-face workspaces, but also at remote workspaces, and maybe comparisons about it. Also comparing humor in times of different personal and social crises could be of use to really create more mental health and well-being within the workspace that is remote, or later on maybe again face-to-face. Further practical exploration is also needed because organizations do not really seem to be conscious about humor as a resource in the organization, and that it can really be seen as a coping strategy at work, but also with regard to whole organizations, and having a very positive mental health effect for the employees. I thank you very much for your attention, and I hope we will have some time for comments and questions and discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mann. Those were all excellent presentations. I enjoyed every single one of them. And now we have about 10 minutes, a little bit more than 10 minutes for questions and answers. So for our participants, you can post your questions into the chat box in Zoom. For panelists, you can just mute and talk. I guess I could start us off. I got a question for Shannon here. So you seemed very optimistic about, I guess, work after COVID and how we'll learn from it. So question for you is, how many years until we get to a 20-hour work week?
Wow. Well, from a technology, crypto, blockchain perspective, I would say 2025. I'm being less optimistic than my colleagues who think it's going to be 2023. But originally I went in about a year and a half ago going, this isn't going to happen until 2030. I mean, come on. Yeah, I don't believe that anymore. Quantum computing is going to change everything, and it's kind of already here. Not necessarily in a commercial mainstream way, but there's universities who are setting it up. IBM is doing stuff with it. So a few years and the game changes. I'd like to venture a guess, although this is only my opinion, but the impact that we've just seen on our lives in the last 18 months is going to be rivaled by technology in 5 years' time to probably the same degree. And we'll adapt and we'll change and we'll ride those waves. But for many of us, it's not going to be easy at all.
Right. Well, 3 years. That is difficult to imagine for sure.
Yeah.
I guess I'll just be looking forward to it for the time being. Thank you.
Just a comment, can I just jump in?
Yeah,
or
of
not?
course.
The 4-day work week is all in the news these days. If you look around, it looks like it has some traction. In Europe, certainly in the United States, the press is full of stories about the 4-day work week and some of the companies that are putting it out there. So it's a great story to follow. Wall Street Journal just had something out on Sunday, and Atlantic had something out. So have a look.
It's kind of like the pendulum. A couple of years ago, God, maybe it's 5 years. I've been doing this a long time. Let's say 2015. It was always on. That was kind of like the corporate policy. You had all your digital devices and there's an expectation that you were kind of always on, always available. And particularly in the more innovative entrepreneur, startup, fintech, financial technology space, they kind of do the opposite of what corporate would do, which would make sense. But the pendulum's almost going the other way, where you can be more efficient with your tools and technology and set your own hours. And as long as you get your job done, they don't need to see you clock in 9 to 5 anymore. So that's being eroded. And then as more fintechs, I'm going to keep saying fintechs, but I'm sure any kind of tech startup, starts doing more and more with larger organizations, it'll be much slower because larger organizations are much more institutionalized and they have 20 and 30-year legacy systems that are not easy to change, but that will start eroding. The impact of the fintech working with the corporate will start having a symbiotic relationship where organizations will start to see the benefit and the results of having their staff do less hours. COVID-19 has expedited that. I'm talking to recruitment agencies in the fintech space, and applicants are saying, if I can't work from home 3 days a week, I'm not even going to apply for the job. That was not the case in such a traditional sector before.
So
altogether, I think work is changing. That's what we're seeing. Work is changing radically.
Yeah. I'm nervous. I'm really nervous. I work in the space and I'm nervous. I interviewed a crypto tech company who's well established, has transformed the entire gambling industry. And he said to me that he believes that technology is going to have a greater impact on people in their work life in the next 5 years than he compared it to something extraordinary, something like Noah's Ark and what happened on the planet. But he was a bit tongue in cheek. But I said to him, I'm not sure that's great news for, let's say, the baby boomers, even some of the Gen X, because we don't want to not be able to go to our jobs. And his response was, you're going to be forced to be creative or you're just going to be left behind, because creativity, in his opinion, was where humans were being driven to go to as a result of technology, taking away everything that you really don't want to do, including your job. So yeah, it's uncomfortable, but it's coming. It is coming.
So during COVID, I actually lost my job, and I had a lot of time and space to think about all sorts of things. And what became apparent was that, okay, I have the time now, but that does not mean I'll immediately populate it with things that are meaningful for me or things I really want to do. And I started off just wasting a ton of time, right? So hypothetically, if the world, everybody in the world works far less, I can potentially see some risks involved. Could somebody share their thoughts, please?
Huge risks.
This whole story has a history. It's my scholarship. I've worked on this for over 50 years with my dissertation at Chapel Hill. And working hours is what I've been writing about. An expectation that working hours would gradually get shorter and shorter was with us for over a century. No one thought that working hours would stop getting short. George Bernard Shaw, John Maynard Keynes predicted 2.5-hour workday by 1980. And it's only recently that that expectation of the gradual drawdown of work was inevitable. John Fitzgerald Kennedy thought it would be inevitable. I think it's coming back now with the COVID crisis over and people taking a second look. It comes with hazards, absolutely. Some of my favorite writers, Robert Hutchins of Chicago University, the president of Chicago, warned of its coming. Hannah Arendt, one of my favorite writers of all time, she talks about this extensively, that that work would be gradually eliminated by technology, and that we'd better get used to it. And be prepared for it. I think the marketplace, my paper, is maybe one of the few places that it's possible that you can bring back a way to prepare people for that leisure time, for that that abundance of time to make good use of it. Buying products in the experience economy that would allow for creativity, that where instead of at work, we be creative and find our meaning and purpose and value at work increasingly. We'd be looking outside of work. That was a prediction from Aristotle and Plato down. The expectation was that we'd find our meaning and purpose and identity outside of work, outside of the economy, in what Walt Whitman called higher progress. It's only in the last 50 or 60 years that view has been replaced by this utopian la land view that work can somehow be made into this, perfect place that we'd run to that, and it ain't happened. So work, I think, again, we're taking a second look at it. I'm talking too much.
think the challenge comes when it's not your choice, when it's not something you proactively pursue, but it's something you find yourself surprisingly in one day. And then you go through all the emotional and that inner voice is like, I should be. And there's a panic and anxiety that doesn't allow you to think clearly about how to tap into what is really meaningful to you.
Okay.
And so you almost need help doing that. But then do you even know that you need help? Do you know that there's help available? The people I talked to didn't, except your man who bought the book on chauvinism. But think about that. Destruction as the impetus of creation. So this COVID-19, I didn't see it coming in March and April. I was so surprised by this, particularly with the clientele. I guess
I
them.
think all are.
And it's brought them to their knees, metaphorically speaking, to have some existential inquiry. Some would say crisis, but let's call it an inquiry. But if you're prepared and know that in the next 5 years, your working world is going to change a lot. Money is changing. Money is already changing.
Yep.
If we can prepare and educate and inform so that it's proactively pursued, we might find ourselves, without a job, but more comfortable with it. If you lost your job because of COVID, that was probably deeply uncomfortable. So there's almost like a transition period where you need to find your new calm, your new zen, before you can even start thinking about building something or getting a job. So I'm not sure I'm that optimistic, actually. I'm nervous.
I think it fits right into this conference's theme of meaning. That I did a piece for Huffington Post a couple of years ago about work as our religion, and it's failing us. I'll look it up. I liked it. And my argument is that this is a question of meaning that most of us have in my generation and perhaps even before looked at work as a primary source of meaning, and that's drying up.
And an
that
identity.
is a real identity, meaning, purpose. And it's dry. And I think the psychologists certainly ought, we should begin to talk about that and think about, plan for the change.
Yeah, that has been part of the core of my research as well, in terms of work many times is equal to life meaning, but there are other areas as well. That's why I say that the development of the self is so important, because you can develop yourself either in a work environment or outside your work environment. And that is key to life meaning. And at the same time, work, the development of the self, and your social relationships are the 3 pillars where people find meaning in general. And as Shannon I interview 40 professionals globally for working for different multinationals. And more or less, all of them said the same thing. Are those 3 pillars the ones that support life meaning? If you identify yourself only with just one, as you just said, Ben, in terms of your work, your religion, then when you lose it, you are totally lost. You have nothing. Yeah. So yeah, we are living very interesting time. And if work changes, it changes everything.
Yeah. I don't want to say it, but I'm going to say it, but it's an uncomfortable thing to say. And I'm not an academic, and I'm certainly not a doctor. I'm just an entrepreneur who talks to a lot of business owners. I'm going to say it anyway. I think my read over the last couple of years, and I don't mean to sound hyperbolic here, but I think if we're not prepared for what's coming over the next 5 years, we will probably, in my opinion, experience more suicides than we did during the World War. I don't think the professionals that I'm talking to are having an existential inquiry right now, and they're not okay. They're not okay. But we're now starting to ease, and I think that'll subside. And as you move away from pain, you feel less of a need to change stuff. And you're like, nah, it's not so bad, because you forget it really hurt 3 or 4 months ago. But what we're coming into is, it's radical, and it's going to be forever. You don't get to go back. Like, today is the slowest it's ever going to be for anyone. It's only going to get faster. And as I'm talking to individuals who are 40 years in their career, 50 years in their career, like they don't want to go back and retrain and relearn, but I don't know enough to know what they're going to do when their jobs get automated and technology comes in. And I don't know who is going to start preparing these people, but I'm seeing it and I'm like, I don't know what to do about it, but I think it's going to be uncomfortable.
Yeah, one of the concerns, Shannon, is that what you say is absolutely true, that will be coming sooner or later. My real concern comes from governments are not really ready, are doing nothing apparently to speed up the process. And they are the ones who will be supporting that layer of people who will be unemployed. So individually, there's many things that we have to do, but from the institutional point of view, there's a huge amount of work that nobody is seeing really.
Not yet. And the challenge is that you don't talk about this stuff at work. You can talk about leadership and your soft skills, and now you can start talking about mindfulness, but you don't get to talk about the other stuff. And I published the research because I wanted to send it back to everyone. Be like, guys, you think you're the only one, but you're really not. And everybody's kind of feeling the same thing here. So I thought it might be a little bit reassuring for them. And it's all open. You don't have to put in an email or register for it, because nobody wants to admit on a website that they're interested in this stuff yet. So how do you even reach them is another question. But I have more questions than I do have a plan. But I put up insidegrowth.io in March or April of this year, just kind of be like, okay, here's something. But I'm going to keep talking to people about it and seeing who's interested in building that bridge.
Yeah, no.
Business and personal are crashing together, and someone needs to kind of soften the crash. Someone needs to, not necessarily me.
Yeah, I think there are three different signs that something is coming. One is, I think that the institutions will not longer support us as citizens. Second, economy, in terms of what you just said. There's another economy in terms of blockchain, just living apart from the institutions. And the third one is just what you just said about technology at the same time. So those three things, plus the climate change that is in the middle of everything as well. So if you look at that combination, it looks a little bit scary, because you realize that there's something moving on outside the institutions, and it's growing. Yeah. And apparently from the institutions, nobody's paying really attention to it, or not addressing what is coming.
Well, I'm sorry to interrupt, but unfortunately we're out of time. But I do invite you guys, if you're interested, to continue this conversation. You can go to the networking section, and there will be a tab called groups. And I think there's a group made for meaning and work already. If not, you have the luxury to create yourself. And I might join for that conversation too. So, but for now, we need to move on to the next keynote by Dr. Wong.
Thanks, Jackie.
Yes. Thank you, everybody. Goodbye.
'Cause I'm made of stardust, and my soul can reach beyond the stars. The deeper the valley, the higher the mountain. No distance is